Rob Joyce and I'm the Deputy Director here at Alma Economics. Well, the policy measures that we heard about today were certainly big by really any standards. In some ways, it was the kind of budget that's a bit of a classic of the genre for a post-election budget, certainly with respect to seeing significant tax rises to try to put the public finances on a more sustainable footing. This does tend to happen with pretty high frequency in the first budget after an election, although it did happen on a very large scale today. Some of these tax rises were explicitly trailed, but a number, in fact the majority, were not. Then those tax increases, in combination in this case with quite a bit of extra borrowing as well, were used to fund some pretty significant injections into areas of government spending, which basically reflect the new government's assessment of broad priorities and areas in real need of extra support. So particularly the NHS, but there are also extra investments in areas including education and housing. But you take those extra elements of spending, combined with a bigger backdrop, if you like, to this whole event, which is continued weak growth, high levels of public sector debt, higher interest rates on that debt that the government is having to pay than we've been used to for some time. All of that means we're probably looking at some really very tight spending settlements across many parts of the public sector in the years ahead, despite all the tax rises that we heard about today. Well, I think a lot of what we heard about today really had an emergency feel to it. This was about a new government coming in and wanting to quickly raise quite large amounts of money from tax and funnel that into these key areas of priority as it sees them, like the NHS. But really a lot of the hard work beyond that, over the rest of the Parliament and even beyond that, is about the effectiveness of policy design, understanding better how to make better policy, both in terms of how the government spends its money and the effectiveness of that, and how fairly and effectively and efficiently it raises its money. So to take some examples that relate directly to things we heard about today, take the NHS. As I said, there were big extra injections of money into the NHS announced today. But part of the backdrop to that is this concern about the performance of the NHS, its ability to deliver the kind of health outcomes that we want it to. And part of that seems to be related to a decrease in levels of NHS productivity, which is not fully understood. Understanding and addressing that is going to be a fundamental challenge, and if we can do it effectively, that will relieve many of the pressures we face, both in terms of delivering better health outcomes for the nation, but also reducing pressure on the rest of the public sector. The NHS accounts for almost half now of all public service spending. So if we can make money that we give the NHS go further in delivering what we want, it's going to reduce the pressures, the funding pressures on much of the rest of the public sector. Education investment, we heard about some of that today. As ever, the big question there is how can that go as far as possible? How can that be spent as best as possible in order to help produce productive, happy and healthy adults and ensure that the nation's talents are not wasted if people happen to be born in certain places? But how do you do that? Health-related benefits. We heard about some measures to reduce health-related benefits spending confirmed today. Part of the backdrop to that is a somewhat unexplained, not fully understood increase in the demand for health-related benefits, which is a pretty worrying sign for the health and well-being of the nation. And again, it's creating a lot of unintended spending pressure for the government, which is creating more pressure for it to raise more tax or cut spending elsewhere. So understanding and addressing the root causes of that trend is another key challenge. On the tax side, grappling with tax design, not just simple things like changing rates and thresholds, but tax design. So again, take two of the taxes that were raised today, employer national insurance and capital gains tax. Those are examples of taxes where the government today has mostly done things that are easiest to do in order to quickly raise money. It's raised rates, it's changed thresholds, but there are more fundamental ways you could try to reform those taxes, which might offer hope of being able to raise similar sorts of money, but in a way that's actually more conducive to wider goals like economic growth, productivity, stimulating investment, that kind of thing. And ultimately, it's about the effectiveness of our investments in unlocking more productivity and growth and national prosperity, which would make all of these other decisions so much easier. So I guess that's where it's really incumbent on all of us in the policy research and analytical community to do our little bit to try to help.